joining us for day 2 of the Conservative Conference. Let me tell you this, if you were here yesterday and you come back today, we have saved the best stuff for today, all right? Now, if you were only here today and you weren't here yesterday, boy, did you miss the best stuff. Make sure you're here next year, all right? So keep it in mind. But it's good to be with you. If you're joining us on Facebook today, watching live, or catching us on demand later, welcome. It's good to be with you again. We are looking forward to this tremendous day. Well, we're going to start off today really by looking at bang at what's in this budget. And if there's nothing else Kathy Hochul has delivered for us, Governor Hochul has certainly dropped a bomb on this one. So it's going to be very interesting to see the future of New York State. Now, I believe that we had an introducer scheduled to introduce Senator O'Mara. And is Mr. Quinn in the room anywhere? I'm not seeing at the moment. What? Quinn going once, Quinn going twice, all right? Sold back to Wayne County, all right? You had your chance, all right? So let me say this. I have known Senator O'Mara since back in his days in the Assembly, and I have found him to be a friend of the Conservative Party. I appreciate the stance that he takes representing the regions that I'm from. I tend to be a more rural region, and I am thankful that in New York State we are not forgotten because we have representatives in elected office like Senator Tom O'Mara that stand up for what is true and what is right in this party. So Senator O'Mara, we would welcome you to come and share with us and talk to us a whole lot more about what's going on in that State House. Senator Tom O'Mara.
We'll talk to Quinn later, I guess, about the introduction. But, good morning, everybody. It's a pleasure and actually an honor to be with you this morning, bright and early. I'm Senator Tom O'Mara. I represent portions of the Finger Lakes and the Southern Tier. My district right now spans from Ithaca to Hornell. That's right, I'm the lucky conservative Republican in the state legislature to represent Ithaca. And it's been an exciting ride representing Ithaca, but at least the first couple of draft mats that have come out draw Ithaca away from me. So they can actually have a district they can try to win, I guess. You know, I'm the chair or not the chair, I wish I was the chair. I'm the ranking member of the Senate Finance Committee. And, you know, right now we're in the throes of picking apart this budget that the governor has put out. We're undergoing budget hearings that started last week. We've only been through 2 days of those budget hearings so far. We start up again today and go 3 days this week. Last week started out with public protection, the first day. That hearing went 13 hours. Fortunately, it's on Zoom, so we can kind of come and go and don't get stuck at the dais all day long, which has been nice, but certainly a lot going on with public protection and a lot of what the problems and issues are in New York State has to do with criminal justice and the coddling of criminals that we have seen for the last 3 years since the Democrats took over the majorities of both houses of the state legislature. You know, I was lucky enough to have served for a few years before the Democrats took over everything 3 years ago, but we only had a razor-thin majority during those years. And as you're all aware, even a couple of those years had to make a coalition with the Independent Democratic Caucus, which was not pleasant, but it was better than the alternative. And while we got characterized for a long time in the Republican Senate as not being Republican enough, not being conservative enough, we had our finger in the dike, so to speak. And we've seen just what the Senate Republicans were holding back for all those years, and we're seeing it full force. Criminal justice is just the main highlight of that, but the spending and increased debt in New York State, you know, Governor Cuomo used to boast about keeping his budgets to about 2% increase, with some gimmicks in there, but roughly around 2% spending increases, but debt escalated during that time. All these grandiose projects he had around the state, including the Tappan Zee Bridge, you know, cost a lot of money and a lot of debt that he didn't have to put in his budgets because it's going to be paid out over 20, 30 years. So the future of New York with that debt, and we need to get that debt under control in New York State as it's running out of control. You know, the Governor Hochul has really, unfortunately, turned out to be Cuomo 2.0, and maybe even a little worse. Maybe a little less corrupt at this moment, anyways, from what we've seen. But you know, she's gone out. She's been a masterful fundraiser. She's raised $21 million in 5 months. But why is that fundraising so easy? It's been so easy for her. There is a surplus of cash at the state government, billions of dollars, probably about $18 billion when you include the federal COVID funds that have come in, the more than expected tax revenues in New York State. So there's about $18 billion that could be up for grabs in this budget. While her proposal right now is only around a 3 or 4% increase in spending to this year, it takes us up to $216 billion annually. And there's going to be the pigs at the trough to try to get a hold of whatever piece of that $18 billion they can. And that's what that $21 million in fundraising is really all about, in my opinion. You know, we went through a budget cycle last year with Governor Cuomo where the legislature had him over a barrel because of the investigations that were going on. And while he generally kept spending to 2 to 3% during his first 10 years in the office, it went to over 10% last year, while the Democrats, supermajorities, had him over a barrel and extracted everything they could out of him before they then, you know, continued the onslaught to ultimately take him out of office. And I was certainly happy to be a part of that, and was, and I'll get to that in a minute. But the extra money that's there is going to be fought over very, very much up until our April 1st deadline for the budget this year. And it's concerning to me of where that just may go. You know, we've got, Governor Hochul put in a little over 7% increase in school spending. And schools are incredibly important. Our education of our young people is incredibly important. But we spend far and away more per pupil than any state in the country does. And we don't get the results for it. And while she's putting a 7% increase in for public education, there's only about a 4.5% increase for charter schools. So again, being treated unfairly, limiting choice for what parents want to do with their kids and with their kids' education. And this is really holding back minority communities that are poor and don't have the ability to send their kids to private schools. Charter schools presents an option when that's available, a choice to send their children to a better school. And it's those same communities that are being torn apart by the criminal justice programs in this state. You know, we see the ones in the legislature that seem to be the loudest on these criminal justice reforms are some of these white, extreme, progressive liberals, not from minority communities, rallying for these issues. You know, I want somebody to show me a community of color that is okay with crime in their neighborhoods. It doesn't exist. So who are they serving with these goals? It's just mind-boggling to me, and the state continues to deteriorate with that. You know, we have a very concerning situation with our unemployment fund in New York. Well, we've got all these billions of dollars sitting around, and Governor Hochul has put, I think, about $9 billion towards rainy day funds. She's put nothing towards the unemployment insurance fund, which is $9 billion of debt to the federal government that was borrowed during COVID for all the unemployment we had, and making no efforts to pay that down. That $9 billion has resulted in significant increases to businesses across the state of all sizes, with increased rates for their unemployment insurance. We should be paying that down. I argued for that in last year's budget because that same debt existed then and no money was put towards it. I think that the Democrats in charge just think that the federal government is just going to keep sending us billions of dollars. But, you know, I think we saw with the SALT legislation that the federal representatives in Congress and the U.S. Senate from red states are like, enough is enough. We're not going to continue to subsidize your high spending and high taxing ways in states like New York, California, and Illinois. Because that's ultimately coming off of tax revenues for the federal government. So that's, you know, we're seeing that pushback, and, you know, frankly, I was amazed with the amount of money that the federal government came through with for New York State under COVID, because we were showing revenues exceeding expectations. We were showing that things weren't as desperate, at least to the $15 billion tune that came through with from the federal government to New York State in the end, and it's resulted in the excess cash that we have, but the excess tax revenues we've gotten in the same period have bolstered that as well. So that is what is really concerning about this going forward. I don't think there's going to be any further federal bailout or forgiveness of that $9 billion unemployment insurance debt that we have, and that's going to be on the backs of our small business owners, every employer in the state, and paying those, and that impacts the affordability of doing business in New York and the opportunities that businesses can create in New York for New Yorkers to have good jobs, which we need. And, you know, our plan and our proposals, what we call the Take Back New York program for the Republican Senate, is all about affordability and opportunity. You know, there's certainly no coincidence whatsoever that New York State is the highest tax state, most expensive tax state to live in, and also leads the country in out-migration. It's not about the weather. The weather's always been there. It's about affordability and lack of opportunity in New York State that has been driving New Yorkers out of the state. You know, there's now an onslaught on agriculture and our farming industry with the Farm Wage Board just approving lowering the threshold of overtime on farms from 60 hours before you have to pay overtime down to 40 hours. It's going to devastate many, many farms in New York State, and these radical Democrats have no clue. The farm wage labor bill was sponsored in the New York State Senate and the New York State Assembly, I think 2 or 3 years ago, by 2 members of the legislature that represent areas of Queens, New York City, the farming metropolis of New York State. It's just unconscionable to me that you can have representatives that out of touch and so far removed from an industry dictating a very significant policy that's going to have major consequences to our farming industry. You know, I listened to and watched a lot of the hearings on the Farm Wage Board. I testified at it myself at the last hearing. You know, it had to be 90% in opposition, and not just from farmers, but from farm workers themselves that are concerned about not getting enough hours on the job when they're here seasonally. They want as many hours as they can get. And the farmers have just made it clear, and we've shown with the 60-hour threshold that they've cut back on overtime for individuals because they're not going to pay time and a half. They can't afford to. They're in commodity markets where their prices that they can sell their commodities for are set by at least regional, if not national markets, and they can't control the price. They can't just increase the price because their cost of labor has gone up, and New York State farmers already pay a much higher percentage of their overall revenues to labor than other farms in other states across the country. The efforts that we've undertaken and are looking to do is to certainly lower taxes. One high point of Governor Hochul's budget is she moves forward a middle-class tax cut that we, when we were last in the majority, put through, and then it was delayed for a couple of years. Well, we're moving up that delay to next year. It's only 0.25%, but it's something. It's the right direction, anyways, to go with this. But it's not going to be a huge savings for individuals, but it's a step in the right direction. We got in a few years ago a manufacturing tax, elimination of the corporate franchise tax for manufacturers in New York State. And in the end, and it's a proposal that I was pushing, this is probably 6 years ago or so, and it ended up initially only applying to Class C corporations, which are the larger corporations, larger businesses, larger manufacturers generally, not the so-called pass-through entities of subchapter S corporations, partnerships, LLCs that their tax passes through on their personal income tax. Those were left out. Now those manufacturers account for 75% of the manufacturing entities in New York State. We're still pushing very hard to get that included, to provide that savings to manufacturing, because I'm a firm believer that manufacturing as well as farming need to be the backbone and the foundation of our economy. It's those industries that add value and create wealth while creating jobs and lift everybody up. It creates businesses that then other businesses come and provide services for. So that should be the base and the number one focus of our activities in New York, in my opinion, is to bolster manufacturing as much as we can. We certainly saw through the pandemic many of the issues that are created when we're not manufacturing things locally or even in the United States, and the supply chain issues and the shortages that we had for a couple of years now is just extremely problematic and chaotic to our industry that we're suffering with right now. The other major issue, I'm not sure if anybody's spoken about it yet at this conference, is the climate and the New York's Green New Deal, the CLCPA, the Climate Leadership, Climate Protection Act that was enacted a year or two ago, and just now they've established a Climate Action Council that came out with proposals on how to eliminate our greenhouse gas emissions in New York State. Laudable goal, I suppose. Do what we can. You know, we should limit emissions and pollution wherever we can. New York State accounts for 0.4% of global emissions. If we do this, everything that these radical progressives want to do, and eliminate our emissions from 0.4% to 0, we will have no impact on what we've been seeing about the climate change and the more frequent disasters and big. Whether you're a climate change believer or a climate change denier, the issue is if we do it perfectly, according to them, we're going to have no impact on what the impacts of these climate changes are going to be on New York State. And we're looking at doing this faster than anywhere, phasing these things in. You won't be able to buy a gasoline car after 2035. It's only 13 years away. Everything will be electric. The costs that are estimated in there right now by the Business Council of New York State under this Green New Deal will be an extra 55 cents a gallon of gas on top of the high prices we're paying right now. It will be an increase of 26% to home heating fuels. There will be massive increases to our electricity bills by converting everything to renewable electric and getting away from fossil fuel plants. We have very limited nuclear in New York. That can continue under the Climate Action Council, but fossil fuels being phased out. And while we phase out currently fossil fuel plants in New York State, we're increasing our imports of electricity from even dirtier coal burning plants from other parts of the country. It's mind-numbing to sit and think about this and what the consequences are and will be to our economy at proceeding at such a breakneck speed on these issues. Right now, and these costs aren't in the budget. They're not in the budget. One thing that's in the budget is some language that we must eliminate sources of emissions from fossil fuels to the extent practicable over a very short period of time. Now, that includes wood burning, people that heat their homes with wood. That could potentially be eliminated. There's talk of that. I mean, there's extreme talk of not being able to have a campfire when you go camping. I mean, it's just some asinine things that are out there and being talked about, but it's those kinds of things that become reality in New York, and we're fighting back on them and pushing back on them because they're just so far out of control. These increases are not in the budget because they're going to be run through the Public Service Commission that oversees the utilities, and the utilities are going to require, the Public Service Commission will require renewable sources of energy that drives up the cost. Right now there's a case before the Public Service Commission for the offshore wind projects we've heard off of Long Island that are moving forward. That's not just going to cost Long Islanders and New York City people more. It's going to cost the rest of us all across the state more on our utility bills. And we're talking in upstate regions anywhere from a 4% to a 12% increase in your electricity bills to keep up with these renewable energy mandates and the extra costs of doing those. It's frightening, and they're being done, and nobody even knows. It's all being done. Public Service Commission. Utilities are pushing back, but the commission controls. The commission gets its direction from the governor. You know, it's more of Kathy Hochul being Cuomo 2.0 going forward with these things. You know, Governor Hochul, since she took office in the middle of August, she followed through on the prison closure plan that Governor Cuomo had decided what they were going to be before he left office. They were decided in like June, is the information I get from the correction officers union in New York State, that those were decided and they knew they were coming, so Hochul just followed through with what he had set up. The farm wage was a Cuomo thing that Hochul's following through on now. She can stop it. It's got to go through her now that it's went through this farm wage board. Will she? Probably not. The health mandates, the masking, the vaccinations, they've all continued apace from the Cuomo administration through the Hochul administration. You know, we have a new commissioner of health now, Dr. Bassett. It's taken over for Dr. Zucker. First of all, why did Hochul keep Zucker in office from August 15th to December 1st? I mean, that guy was a disaster. He didn't have any independent thinking at all. He just did whatever Cuomo told him to do, from the nursing home disaster on through the whole, all the mandates and everything. You know, it's coming up on the one-year anniversary of the Senate Investigations Committee hearing that I was at, and I'm the ranking member on that, where we brought up and pushed for subpoenas to be issued from that committee, that the majority has to issue those subpoenas. The minority doesn't have the authority to. And during that debate, it was all on Zoom, so things can be a little more controlled. They muted my microphone while I was arguing about subpoenas for that. Muted my microphone so they couldn't hear me on Zoom anymore. So I'm there making hand signals. I'm going like this. I can't talk. I'm going shaking my head. No, I put my middle finger up, but I certainly wanted to. They were denied. We came back a month later, tried to get those subpoenaed issues to the Department of Health to find out just what the hell was going on. Department of Health, that fatal nursing home order, but over 60 upper-level Department of Health officials, 60 people at the Department of Health making over $100,000 a year left during that time period of the nursing home order to the end of the year. The head of the long-term care section of the Department of Health that oversees nursing homes for the Department of Health, Mark Kissinger. He'd been around forever. He's like a 34-year veteran of the health department. Worked under Governor Pataki. We couldn't get a hold of him. He wouldn't return calls. Then he ends up retiring 2 months after that order. And in the reporting of his retirement, it made clear that Mark Kissinger, the head of the long-term care for New York State Department of Health, had nothing to do, no involvement in that fatal nursing home order of March 25th. These are all being micromanaged by somebody with no expertise in health whatsoever. Well, he was an expert in everything, Andrew Cuomo. You know, whether it was pushing cars out of snowbanks or pulling barges off of shoals in the Hudson River, or, I mean, you name it, he did it all. You know, we didn't need any other government because he was the government, and he told us that in his budget address a couple of years ago. That's what we were up against. Now we're dealing with the same kind of things with Kathy Hochul. So, you know, we're all about taking back New York. We're about ending the exodus from New York with our proposals at the Republican conference. You know, but there's supermajorities against us. We're going to see where our district lines are, probably today. We expected them yesterday, but they didn't get through. Apparently there is much infighting amongst the Democrats in both the Assembly and the Senate on their lines that they can't come to an agreement on putting a map out to even show us where ours might be. So we are waiting with those, and we will see how those look, hopefully sooner rather than later. And then we are prepared to go to court along with other groups to bring action on how these lines were drawn. You know, we have an independent commission that has been disregarded. They purposely didn't come to agreement on the maps. It went back to the old way. It's called LAD4, which is a legislative task force on redistricting. Gets together every 10 years. There's legislative appointees on it. There's been no official meeting of LAD4. The minority members of that from the Senate and the Assembly have not been engaged at all. And these maps are just going to come out of thin air. And we're most likely going to end up in court, and it's going to push this whole election year process potentially off its schedule of starting petitions at the end of February and having a primary in June. Depending on how long this gets prolonged in court, you know, we could see those dates change. We could see the petition carrying compressed, requiring less signatures and given less time. Could change the primary date. We don't know until we get through that proceeding if we have to go the court case. But certainly there's national groups that are looking at the congressional lines. And if you saw those that came out yesterday, there's quite a few of them that I think give rise to gerrymandering claims that go all over the place. I mean, we've got a district that goes from Niagara Falls to the Thousand Islands. It's unconscionable. The size of this. So I'm getting the hook here by Jason. Did I talk that long already? Because I wanted to ask for questions and answers too, but I don't have time, do I?
You got time for 2 questions. Let's do 2 questions.
Okay. Yes, sir. Right here.
Good morning. My name's Sam Pirozzolo. I'm from Staten Island. I want to talk a little bit about education. Maybe you can point me in the right direction. I also happen to be vice president of the New York City Parents Union, and we won litigation against the city pertaining to charter schools. When there's a school with co-location, if the city decides to spend $5 million to update the public school portion of the building, they must also spend $5 million to update the charter school portion. Charter schools are public schools. So where's the litigation? And if you need plaintiffs, let me know. And you know, maybe if Peter Murphy is here, he's the right guy to talk to. But why aren't we suing, saying that charter schools are public schools? There's no cap on public schools. You know,
No,
there's no public schools.
I agree with you. I'm not familiar with that situation you're talking about, but I could certainly look into it and try to get back. Do you have a card or something that we can see if we can find out? But you know, with the many interests that are out there and deep-pocketed interests that are pushing for charter schools, we ought to be able to get some litigation going to do that. Are there instances where they're improving the public side of the building but not the charter side, or they're just not doing either?
It's law, well, now they're stopping the co-locations, right? But it is law that if you improve a public school side of the building with a charter school location, you must spend an equal amount of money. And that was the litigation that was won by the New York City Parents Union. So it's there.
Okay,
So
great.
it's precedent.
We'll check it out.
One more to keep us on target. One more. Next question. Going once.
Let's go twice.
Oh, I see that hand.
Okay. The apartment pond, there's been quite a stink about cow farm.
They're methane emissions.
I've read a lot about that too. They're not going to take our beef away from us and our dairy.
I don't believe so, no. I really don't believe that's going to happen. I don't put anything past these characters. I really don't. It's very scary what's going on. We're being as loud as we can. But, you know, I get people around my district say, how come we're not hearing from you? I'm like, we put stuff out almost every day. I can't make the media report it. And I only have so much of a budget to get stuff out directly to constituents that's limited. So just getting the word out is extremely difficult. Even our upstate local TV stations and newspapers, you know, they're all on an agenda too. It might not be as extreme as the nationals, but they have their agendas and they spin things, you know, maybe not as artfully or as much to the extreme as the nationals do, but it's happening locally too.
Yeah, last week in Albany, they passed a bill that will make all cars sold in New York zero emission by 2035. I understand by 2030, every cow in New York has to be zero emission as well. So, all right.